The base had seen its fair share of cruelty, but no one had ever expected it to come from a man as decorated, as disciplined, as feared as Colonel James Briggs. And yet, there she was, Private Elena Torres, 23 years old, her dark hair plastered against her cheeks, her fatigues soaked through. Moments earlier, the colonel had forced her head into the toilet of the women's barracks, pressing down until she gagged, until her lungs screamed for air. When he finally released her, she stumbled into the corridor, dripping, humiliated, gasping. Soldiers nearby froze, caught between fear and disbelief. Everyone knew Briggs's reputation. Ruthless, uncompromising, a man who believed soldiers were forged by fire and broken only if they were too weak to survive it. But this was different. And Elena, she wasn't weak. Not in the way Briggs thought. She straightened, water dripping at her boots, and locked eyes with the man who had just tried to drown her dignity. "Sir," she said, her voice hoarse but unshaken, "if you think this will break me, you don't know me at all." The hallway went dead silent. Elena's story. Elena had grown up in Las Cruces, New Mexico, the daughter of a mechanic and a schoolteacher. Her childhood was modest but warm. Sunday dinners with family, summers running barefoot in the desert dust. She wasn't the fastest or the strongest kid in school, but she had a stubbornness that often surprised people. When her father's heart gave out and the family struggled to stay afloat, Elena put her college dreams aside and enlisted. Not because she wanted glory, but because she wanted stability for her mother and younger brothers. From the beginning, kindness marked her service. She shared extra rations with others during training. She volunteered for night shifts when others begged out. She patched up blisters on a bunkmate's heels and wrote letters for those who couldn't find the words home. But kindness, in Briggs's world, was weakness. He watched her offer her last canteen of water during a desert drill. He saw her help a struggling private up the hill instead of sprinting for her own time. And each time, his jaw tightened, his temper flared. Soldiers, in his eyes, weren't supposed to be soft. They were supposed to be steel. The breaking point, the toilet incident, wasn't random. It had been building for weeks. During inspection the day before, Briggs had caught Elena slipping a care package to a fellow recruit, a chocolate bar, contraband but harmless. For him, it was the final straw. "You want to play mother," he had snarled. "Then maybe you belong with the children." And so, in front of others, he dragged her to the barracks bathroom, shoved her head down, and held her there until her body thrashed. When he let go, his eyes were cold. "That's what kindness gets you, Private. Nothing but filth." But Elena didn't cry, and what she did next stunned everyone who thought they understood how a soldier should act. The confrontation. Hours later, in the mess hall, the colonel strode in as if nothing had happened. Soldiers stiffened at attention, trays clattering back onto tables. Briggs was feared, respected, and untouchable. But then Elena walked in. Her uniform was still damp. Her face still blotched from humiliation. And yet she walked straight to the front, past rows of stunned privates and sergeants, until she stood in front of Briggs himself. "Private Torres," he growled. "You're out of line." She stood at attention, but her eyes locked on his. "With respect, sir, you're the one out of line." Gasps rippled through the hall. "You think kindness is weakness," Elena said, her voice carrying in the stillness. "But I know someone who would have disagreed. Someone you knew too." The colonel's face hardened. "Don't." "Your son," Elena whispered. The words struck like a blow. A name no one spoke. Lieutenant David Briggs had been a medic. Bright-eyed, quick with a smile, always the first to run toward the wounded. 2 years earlier, he'd been killed in Kandahar. Since then, the colonel had shut down. He never spoke his son's name. He buried his grief under steel discipline, turning every softness he saw in others into something to crush. But Elena had known David. "He saved my life," she said, her voice trembling now but steady with conviction. "I was hit by shrapnel outside Ghazni. Your son was the one who reached me. He pressed his hands against the wound, kept me awake, told me I wasn't going to die. He stayed until the evac chopper came, even though the firing never stopped." Briggs's jaw clenched, but his eyes flickered. Elena stepped closer, her voice soft but fierce. "His last words to me weren't about himself. They weren't about pain. They weren't even about fear. He said, 'Don't let my father forget how to be human.'" The hall was frozen. The break. Briggs's hands trembled at his sides. His breathing grew ragged. Soldiers who had only ever seen him as an unbreakable wall now saw cracks spreading across the surface. Elena's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. "I kept that promise, sir. Even if it meant standing here now, soaked and shamed, reminding you of who your son really was. He wasn't steel. He wasn't cruelty. He was compassion. And he was the bravest man I ever knew." The colonel's lips parted, his voice rough. "Enough." But it wasn't a command. It was a plea. For the first time in years, tears welled in his eyes. He turned his face, but it was too late. The soldiers had already seen. The unshakable Colonel Briggs, the man who had broken countless recruits, was broken open himself. And in that silence, the base shifted. Not in discipline or orders, but in something deeper, something human. The aftermath. No one moved for what felt like forever. Then, slowly, Briggs stepped back. His shoulders slumped, his voice hoarse. "Dismissed," he muttered, and left the hall. Elena stood alone, still trembling but unbowed. And then, one by one, soldiers rose from their seats. They didn't cheer. They didn't clap. They simply stood with her, their silent presence an acknowledgement of something they all felt but had never dared to say. Kindness was not weakness. It was the strongest thing among them. From that day forward, the base was never quite the same. And neither was Colonel Briggs.